So obviously tonight is BioConnect's night, and Megann works at LabCorp, which is the world's leading healthcare diagnostics company. They are headquartered right here in the Triad region of North Carolina in Burlington. But Megann has a very I hate the word interesting. She has a fascinating role, right? She is this energetic entrepreneur who gets excited about innovation and working with startups. And she leads LabCorp's corporate venture fund. And so I want us all to have a hearty round of welcome for Megann Vaughn Watters. And she's going to tell us a little bit about LabCorp, and then she and I are just going to have a really raucous conversation that everybody is welcome to join in. And we're going to learn more about what they're doing at LabCorp, how they're approaching corporate venture, and why being in corporate venture is something that other big companies should think about doing. So Megann, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Karen. I'm excited to be here now. I'm going to try, and I did make a couple slides so that we could just get a quick overview of everything and then we can jump into it. So I'm going to share that with everybody here. So let me make sure I did that correctly and I can go into the presentation mode. All right. So yeah, here we are. Can everyone see that? Great. Perfect. So Megann Vaughn Watters, as Karen mentioned, I'm Vice President of Corporate Development at LabCorp, and I'm responsible for licensing, strategic partnerships, and equity investments for the company, and also lead our venture fund. And so our team's mission really is to enable and to support LabCorp diagnostics and Covance drug development businesses and their strategic objectives through the commercialization of innovation and new technology. So we invest in innovation in many different ways. For example, we do internal development, we do licensing, M&A, and equity investments. And today I'm here to talk to you about how we partner with earlier stage companies and entrepreneurs like yourselves through partnerships and through the LabCorp Venture Fund. So here's a really busy slide that gives you an overview of LabCorp, but I just wanted to highlight a couple things for people that might not be as familiar with LabCorp, but we're a publicly traded company, leading global life sciences company that is providing clinical, laboratory, and end-to-end drug development services. LabCorp processes 3 million patient specimens a week. And has over 65,000 electronic interfaces to deliver those test results. So that has resulted in a proprietary data set that includes 35 billion lab test results. We also support clinical trial activity in over 100 countries. And so in combination, we offer this end-to-end drug development service from biomarker discovery all the way through to the commercialization of companion diagnostics as soon as the diagnostic and the drug is approved. So that's kind of the highlight of this slide. Next slide, I'd be remiss if I did not mention all of our efforts, extraordinary efforts that we have made, bringing up several tests in just the past couple months that are widely available for COVID-19. So, on the screen, you'll see a couple of things I pulled quickly from the website, some fun stats, and then, the differences between the two main tests that we offer. But we've been really proud of our ability to identify and validate innovative testing solutions, and then also scale at the speed that we've scaled in just the past 4 months for COVID-19 related testing. As of literally this week, we are able to run 100,000 molecular tests a day and 300,000 antibody tests a day. And so our capacity is always increasing as kind of supplies permits and as demand remains. In the middle here, I put a timeline of some of the other partnerships that we've put in place that have, that's in addition to some of the test launches that we've done. But, there's been some activity around patient registries, for instance, that would include all of the data that we're generating from running all these testing and then also pulling data from other sources so that we have this public data registry that could be used for public health purposes and research purposes. Another thing that we're doing is a partnership with PacBio, where we're using their sequencing technology to sequence all of our positive samples that we have to really get a better idea of, maybe the immune response and to add to COVID-19 research. In addition to that, we've done a lot in thinking about at-home testing and devices for the collection of both maybe finger stick samples and then nasal swabs in the home. And so now we also have, at-home options that launched about a month or two ago. So, just a lot of different things that we're doing through our website. You can also, sign up to be part of COVID-19 trials. So kind of active in any way that we can be, but definitely generating a lot of hopefully very helpful data for the use of, the acceleration of clinical trials, maybe through patient recruitment, but then also, just being able to have this data for epidemiologists to search through to see what they can find out about this disease. Okay, so then, just kind of partnering with LabCorp broadly, we are set up in a way that we have a lot of flexibility. So depending on the stage of the technology or the company, we can partner in many different ways. So, anything as early as maybe just doing a clinical study or an evaluation of a technology test or device through sponsored research agreements. We can do equity investments. We can do, licensing agreements and commercial collaboration. So lots of flexibility there. I like to say that, I don't think we've, any deal that we've done looks the same. So they're all very unique to the partner and what we need. And then, we also have the LabCorp Venture Fund. So our fund was created to invest in early stage private companies and partners that are operating in areas of strategic interest, adjacent spaces, or disruptive technologies, so that we can really learn about those emerging businesses or technologies, or have a proprietary relationship or position with that collaborator. Here's just some of our stats, and I put a link to our website at the bottom of this slide, because we actually have a website, so you can find a lot of this information there as well. But these are just kind of on average some of the things that we're doing. So we're pretty early stage. I'd say most of our investments are Series A and B. On average, our initial first investment somewhere between that 500 to 2 million. And then we like to reserve, again, on average up to 5 for each investment for follow-on investment. We have here that the diligence is conducted by our business advisory teams. We actually have over 40 business advisory teams across the enterprise that are kind of divided up by areas of medicine or technology that really taps into all of our expertise that we have at the company, whether it's, technical, scientific, clinical, marketing, you name it. So that really helps with diligence and kind of not only sourcing but evaluating different opportunities. And then all of our investments are approved by our venture fund committee that meets monthly and is comprised of all of our C-level executives. And kind of like I said earlier about why we created the fund and getting that learning, we do require a board observer. So not a board seat, but an observer, and that is to get that strategic return from the investment. What I also like to note is that with over 50% of our portfolio companies, we have some sort of other relationship in place. So it could be some sort of, co-development arrangement, commercial partnership, supply agreement. We have yet to acquire any of our portfolio companies. That's not to say we wouldn't, but it's just not the intention of our corporate venture fund. Some venture funds, that is their intention, and that's great. But we take a minority share of the company and really like to have this partnership. And a lot of times the companies are in these adjacent spaces, so not necessarily something we would acquire, but definitely become a customer of. And then on this slide, you can tell here that we invest in a wide range of sectors. So that's kind of a breakdown of what we've done over the past 9-10 years. But with respect to kind of the strategy of the fund and what we've been interested in over the past couple of years, first of all, thinking about the patient as a consumer. So how can we make things more convenient? Is it decentralizing some of our centralized testing, for instance? How can we collect more samples, more data from patients or consumers in the comfort and convenience of their home? So a lot of investments made in point of care technology, wearables, so for at-home patient monitoring, for instance, alternative sample collection devices, so devices that we can use to collect samples, again, in the home. Maybe it can then be put in the mail and shipped to a central lab for testing. As we think about that convenience, that's also very important to clinical trials as well. We're seeing a huge push towards or in demand for what they call virtual clinical trials. And so again, thinking about how we can best keep these patients retained in clinical trials. In the past, sometimes patients have had to drive hours, just to get their blood drawn or to see a physician, and how can we invest in companies that are enabling us to provide more virtual care, and again, monitoring in the home and the collection of data in the home for these trials. And then also, thinking about the power of the two combined companies, LabCorp Diagnostics and Covance Drug Development, how can that kind of help push, this move towards virtual clinical trials and more data-driven drug development, tapping into that database of 35 billion lab test results to help identify patients quicker for clinical trials. A lot of investment in that space as well. And then finally, again, kind of thinking about that large data set that we have in combination with other data sets, maybe off the EMR, how can we close gaps in care? How can we think about, using that data to help with clinical decision support or population health management tools? So a lot of our investments have been in that space where we're investing in platforms that usually sit on the EMR and are guidelines driven to really help our customers. And we're really seeing that they're able to deliver value-based care and reduce costs to the healthcare system. So that is, I had a little thing pop up here. I forgot about that. So COVID-19 has obviously accelerated a lot of different I think trends that we were already seeing and luckily a lot of things that we were already investing in. But, things like telehealth and remote patient monitoring and even hybrid virtual clinical trials are all spaces that have seen huge investment dollars in the industry. So again, happy to know that was kind of already places that we were focused, but we're even more so focused. So you'll see that we'll be making some, public investments in these areas in the near term. And then finally, we have new leadership at LabCorp. We have a new CEO that started in November, and he came to us from Merck. And so his passion is oncology. And so we do have a fourth area of interest for the fund as well, and that's oncology. So, we're already doing a lot in oncology, and he had several investments in oncology, but now we have even more reason to continue that. And that's just a quick overview of LabCorp.
Awesome. That's incredible. And first of all, thank you for your heroic efforts around COVID-19. And for those of you that just joined us right at 5 o'clock in the pre-roll, Megan and I were just talking about, 6 months ago, who would have thought that public health or population health would be dependent on the availability of Q-tips, right? And so, the whole world has been turned upside down, and LabCorp has been incredibly responsive. And so thank you for all the long days that I'm sure everyone there has been putting in. So we're already getting some questions in on the chat, which is great. But I want to start with, why did LabCorp think a corporate venture fund was a good idea? And how did it get started? Because you don't see a lot of big companies have corporate venture funds. Like, you guys have amazing amounts of internal expertise. So why a corporate venture fund?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we formalized the fund about 9 or 10 years ago, and it was really because we didn't see that there was another kind of obvious way or kind of current process in place for us to really partner with some of these early stage companies. We were interested in some of these companies, but they were either too early for us to do something more typical like a commercial arrangement or a licensing or acquisition, or they're operating in an area that was outside of our core business. So it was really a way for us to, again, really learn more about that company, their space, or their technology before doing something as, I guess you could say risky as an acquisition. And so, that was really the reason we started doing it. And, since then we've made over 40 direct investments in early stage private companies. I'd also say, we really pride ourselves um, on our development expertise. So we have a huge R&D group that is very, very active and has tons of expertise and PhDs. But, as LabCorp, we really focus on that D part, and our expertise is in the development and the automation and the scale and the commercialization. And so we really have to rely on external partners for that R. And the innovation. And so sometimes we really do treat some of our partners in our portfolio companies like an extension of our R&D teams.
Wow, so that's a huge point that I want to emphasize. So you're looking at these startups as the research part, and you guys are very good at the commercialization part.
Right.
But you also mentioned another word that starts with R, which is risk.
Yeah.
So what is the appetite for risk within LabCorp? How do you cultivate that and keep that culture of innovation going? And I would also speculate that, do you feel like actually having a corporate venture fund is a risk, or is it actually a better bet?
Yeah, I'd say more the latter. I mean, we really do think it's a way to kind of take on less risk as you're exploring a new area or new test or a new technology. I mean, I think especially if the technology is early, or if you're just a board observer and watching how something is evolving versus actually owning something and having all the responsibility of getting it to be a successful commercial endeavor, I think you definitely take on less risk. But, with respect to risk as a corporate venture fund, we are more willing to do earlier stage investments. So, you'll see a lot of venture funds that don't want to invest until maybe Series B or until someone has some sort of FDA approval, for instance. And, we are able to do, earlier stage investments because, again, the point of our fund is that strategic return number one and financial return number two. So that does give us the flexibility to really invest because we like the science and the technology and the strategy.
Very cool. So I have questions here in the chat already. I think these are great questions. They sort of fit in with the flow. So I'm just going to sort of divert from our pre-approved questions, right?
Okay.
That we talked about. So Nancy Johnson from the Biotech Center wants to understand geographically, where are the majority of your investments? Do you have any in North Carolina? And what are the top 3 requirements for you to consider investing in a company? Those are great questions.
It's a lot of questions. Yeah, so I'd say for the most part, all of our investments are in the US. That's not to say that we wouldn't invest ex-US. And we do have, kind of outside the fund, we have a sub-fund that we refer to as the bio fund. And that is set up to make very small, very early stage investments in biopharma companies that are partnering with our drug development business. And those are actually all ex-US. So, you never know. But currently our whole portfolio is in the US and just kind of everywhere. But I would say we have, I want to say 2 or 3 in North Carolina, a lot in California, a lot in Boston. Those are kind of the usual suspects. But then we have a handful in the middle of the country as well.
And then the last question was, what are the top 3 requirements for you to consider investing in a company? So as you're doing your due diligence, or as you're sort of looking around, like, what are the top 3 things you're going, good candidate, bad candidate?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the fund has a strategy, but I mean, I'd say that that strategy is pretty loose. We also are looking at things that our businesses are interested in as well. And, you know, uh, that's kind of funny because we have over 40 business advisory teams. So, every business advisory team has a different priority. So we do have a lot of flexibility as to what we're interested in. Sky's really the limit there. But what we pride ourselves on is science at LabCorp, and so the first thing we look at absolutely is the data. How legitimate is this data and this technology and this science? And so that's the first kind of stage of diligence for us, and that's what a lot of our focus is on. And then I'd say also with that strategic fit. So if you have something that's scientifically sound and something that you think might fit within our strategy, we're going to be interested in that. And then I think another part is the management team and kind of it's hard to kind of really quantify what that is, but just the feeling that we get when we're interacting with them throughout the diligence process or partnership conversations, to know that it's going to be a good fit, because a lot of times, especially the earlier stage the company or the earlier the investment, the longer the relationship is.
Which leads me to another question, which is, how are you getting exposed to these startups? Are you looking in accelerators and incubators? I know you're looking like Series A, Series B, which is later than that stage, but sort of how do companies get in your pipeline?
Yeah. So luckily, I think a lot of companies have realized that we're out there, which is great. And I think even if startups don't realize that we have a venture fund, we're one of like two major players, at least on the diagnostic side, in the US. So we get a lot of inbound opportunities that we go through. But then in addition to that, we will also aggressively seek out other companies or areas of interest. And we have a lot of relationships with tech transfer offices, for instance, at all of the big academic hospitals and institutions. We also have investments in other funds. So we have investments in about 6 other funds that are operating in kind of different niche areas of life sciences that we're also interested in. So a lot of times we'll co-invest with them, or we will get opportunities sourced to us through them or other bankers.
Very, very, very cool. So I want you to tell a story now, right? I would love for you to tell a story about one or a couple of the startups that you've worked with, and how did that relation start? What was the interaction like? What were the results of that, and what kind of was the benefit both to the startup and to LabCorp?
Sure. Trying to think of which ones.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
Oh, no, I think it's fine. I think it kind of depends on like success story, I'm assuming.
Well, you know what? Why don't we do one of each? Why don't we do like just a huge success story, and then why don't we do one that had some hiccups and some challenges?
Okay, yeah. And so, I think we can look at success in many different ways, because I would say that we've randomly had very large financial success in some companies that we actually didn't even really get a chance to build like a very strong relationship with. So we were publicly invested in both Foundation Medicine and Flatiron, which were fabulous ROIs for us. But I wouldn't say that we even had a chance to get as close to them as some of our other portfolio companies. So just kind of thinking about I think relationship and kind of strategic return success. We have several investments in this area that we refer to as alternative sample collection. It's really amazing how much we've learned, how much all of us on this one team have learned about just how hard it is to get, a drop of blood out of a consumer, especially if they're by themselves in their own home, and onto even just a piece of paper. So dry blood spot cards are a very typical way of collecting finger stick sample. And we've been offering a very small business, but it's called Lab in an Envelope for years and years before we launched Pixel, which is on our website, but our more savvy, I think, consumer facing, consumer initiated testing business. And you would be amazed how the dry blood spot cards came into the lab. I mean, it looked like, maybe that there was like a murder scene or something. So, thinking about ways that we can make it easier on the consumer, but then also get a really quality sample back into the central lab so that the sample that we're running is generating the tests that there are to the standards of LabCorp. And so, again, like, you just be so surprised all the things that can happen between, puncturing the skin and getting a sample into the lab. But a lot of the work that we've been doing with these portfolio companies is very, very hands-on. And I think we're really excited about the advancements that have been made over the past 4-ish years in that space. One of the devices from one of our portfolio companies, Boston Microfluidics, is currently in our Pixel kit. And that advancement, honestly, it's just making the collection and the separation of the plasma and serum once it hits the device, just metered and better. And then we also have an investment in 7sense, which has a painless collection device. So imagine, just being able to stick something on your upper arm instead of having to deal with pricking your finger and milking your finger and all the things that you have to do, squeezing it to get all the blood out that you need.
Is that what it's called, milking your finger? I've never heard that. I think that's hilarious.
But yeah, so there's just ways to just make the process better for the consumer, but honestly, it's also better for the receiving lab as well. So that's been really exciting, I think, to all of us that have been involved, not only in just the investment, but just all of the work. And for a lot of our portfolio companies, we will offer in-kind study work and evaluation work and constructive feedback and help them with their submissions to the FDA, for instance. So
nice.
We're really excited to see where that goes, because we think that there's a large opportunity in that painless and easy to collect technology.
Well, speaking of making connections in small worlds, so Mary Glenn that you just met, so her mom works at a big law firm in Winston-Salem, and she's their FDA regulatory scientist person.
Oh,
so
cool.
Totally, we hear all about that all the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
I bet she's been busy.
Yes. Fortunately.
Yeah.
So as you think back over your 9 years with the fund, what have been some of the biggest surprises for you and some of the biggest challenges? Because first of all, running a fund is very demanding in and of itself, and it sounds like that's just part of your portfolio of responsibilities.
Yeah.
But what have been some of the biggest surprises as you look back over your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially when I first started my role overseeing the fund, I think as a smaller minority investor, you just assume, and without even a board seat, you just assume maybe that you're going to have less engagement or responsibilities with your portfolio companies, and that is just absolutely not the case. I think because we are a strategic investor and we are a potential customer, and just because we are who we are, like LabCorp can't help but offer all of our expertise and studies and samples and whatever we can to kind of help these companies. We spend a ton of time with our portfolio companies. So I think that was probably my biggest surprise, which I think for the most part has all been a wonderful surprise. That there has been somewhere, unfortunately, there's a little bit too much dependency than we would prefer, but it is situational. So I think that it doesn't matter how small your investment might be, you still might be taking quite a large amount of time working with
startups are needy. We're like little babies, right? Yeah, we have to be fed and burped sometimes and taught right from wrong sometimes. So yeah. And listen, you guys, I can totally understand you're the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right?
Right. Well, and we take for granted kind of having an understanding of what we want, right? So, I mean, not everybody knows that until they ask. So, I think that that's one thing. And then, obviously, I think I mentioned this earlier, but the earlier stage investments that you make, the longer that you're in those investments. So it can become a very long-term relationship. And I think my team and I have gotten a lot better at kind of really making sure that the team that we're investing in is as interesting to us as the technology.
Nice. And I want to reiterate that point because this is something that we tell startup founders all the time. And it's so great to hear it from you, which is it's not always just your product or your service. It is a lot of times a lot really about the team.
Yeah.
You've got to talk about how the mistakes you've made. You have to be transparent. It's got to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask a specific question, and it's a mistake that I have made in the past as a startup founder, and I think it's probably very relevant right here. But sometimes in a startup, even by the time you get to Series A or Series B, where you've got some customer traction, LabCorp is a huge company. And sometimes startups have not ever worked with a company that big. Have you ever been in sort of a situation where like you're the first really big company a startup has worked with and maybe it's just been a little overwhelming or too much or too early or too soon? And then how did you help sort of ameliorate that sense of overwhelm and sort of lack of big company experience in the startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are usually that for a lot of our
Right?
portfolio companies.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a lot of experience with that. I mean, I think the unique thing though is that I think some of the exposure that they get to LabCorp it is smaller. We are a very large company, but I think corporately we're actually pretty lean. So, a lot of these portfolio companies are having pretty frequent meetings with like our chief scientific officer, and they have that kind of exposure and they're getting kind of that constructive feedback when they're asking for it. So a lot of times I think that, or I hope that they kind of forget that we are as big as we are until maybe they're frustrated with us because they want to speak to someone that isn't responding to them, or we once they are at that commercial stage. I mean, we do sometimes require scale that is tough initially for startup companies, but at the same time like a good problem to have.
Yeah, high quality problem. Yeah, for sure. So why do you think other companies don't have corporate venture funds?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's probably just resources and time constraints. We are definitely seeing them pop up more and more, but not as much as you would kind of think. I mean, a lot of companies obviously have corporate strategy or corporate development groups or both, and it's kind of a natural fit, but it is a very different process. And so maybe that is what it is. I think that we kind of slowly got into it because we made like a couple one-off equity investments instead of our typical sponsored research or licensing upfront payment. And then once we kind of felt comfortable there, I think we were like, well, we should formalize this. But it is a little bit different than I think the other kind of corporate development deals that people might be used to. But at the same time, I mean, you don't even have to raise money. I mean, you're a corporate venture fund because you're using corporate funds. So,
That's the hardest part of running a fund, right? Is raising the money.
Exactly. So assuming you have those resources and those flexibility and that flexibility, I mean, I think anyone on our venture fund committee would highly recommend it because we feel as if we really have gotten what we wanted out of it. And it is that kind of insight, that strategic return, even the companies that, we haven't made any money from, or that unfortunately, never made it. We learned from that. Well, thank goodness we didn't go into that, or we didn't make that acquisition. So, I mean, I think that we find, value in even some of those failures.
So it's real. What I heard you just say is it's a way to actually reduce your risk, let the startup take some of the risk, be the canary in the coal mine, if you will.
Yeah.
And then you guys can come on when it's sort of a proven concept. So I'm going to ask some of the other questions in the chat, and then we'll open it up to anybody else that has comments or on the Facebook Live. So Russ Reed, love you, Russ, says, does LabCorp ever place an employee into management of the companies that you've invested in beyond just that board observer status or that board observer seat?
No, it certainly feels like it, but no. Not officially, but yeah, I mean, and I think it's only because we unofficially do, and of course it depends on the portfolio company, but there are some times where we have members of our R&D team that might be speaking to members of their R&D team once a week, or
Nice.
where you're, some of us are maybe speaking, or the board observers speaking to some of their management team fairly frequently as well, but we haven't actually ever placed anyone. I think that's because we're a minority investor, so.
Yeah. So this next question, I'm not sure if you'll have a point of view on this, and it's a curious question. It says, with people who have been unemployed or furloughed, is LabCorp expecting an uptick in employee drug testing as people start to head back to work? That's not something I would have thought about, but makes sense.
I hadn't thought about that either, but I think just generally we are expecting an uptick in testing now that people are leaving their houses again, right? So we saw just obvious low volumes, especially comparatively, because people weren't going to their annual appointments, they weren't going to the doctor's office, they weren't leaving their houses. So as people are getting back to work, we expect an increase in drug testing, but also all testing. Nice.
So does anybody else have any questions for Megann? This has been incredible. And Megann, I knew you'd be a total rock star when we got to sit down and finally have a conversation.
Yeah,
so
me too.
Feel free to unmute yourself, or Heather, are there, or Susan, are there questions coming in on the Facebook Live?
We will check. Give us just 1 sec.
Okay.
Does anybody here on the Zoom call have any questions? I see, Ronald, you've got a national cancer screening background behind you, and I know that oncology is very important to LabCorp.
Yes, I actually wanted to ask, what is the current policy at LabCorp regarding lab-developed tests?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd say a lot of our tests are LDTs, so lab developed tests, versus kind of an FDA approved kit.
Right.
So, all of our lab developed tests are just under different types of regulations.
And so,
but
yeah,
we offer them very frequently.
And what is your thoughts on investment in those lab developed tests?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we invest in companies that have LDTs frequently.
Okay, right, because yeah, it's where I actually spoke with someone. I don't have his name right in front of me, and they wanted an exclusive on it if they actually would promote the tests. And we're debating that, because obviously there's Quest out there and other avenues. What's your thoughts on not having an exclusive and running us promoting the test through both Quest and you guys?
Right. Well, I mean, it always depends. We always want to put the patient first, and obviously, if it's not exclusive, then one could argue that the patient has a better chance of accessing those tests. However, we are partnered, I guess you could say, with I think it's 98%, don't quote me on that, health plans. So, I mean, for the most part, we wouldn't probably prevent someone from being able to access a test that's offered exclusively through LabCorp. It really depends on the relationship between us and the company. If there is some sort of investment, or if there's something that we've done to kind of help that company get to a commercial place. So maybe we've run some studies, we've offered some samples, anything like that. We do like a period of exclusivity, so we can have a first mover advantage, and people think of us as the company that's commercializing that test. But we don't usually seek long-term exclusivity for any reason.
Thanks.
Awesome. Any other questions from the Zoom call? Apparently we don't have any questions on Facebook Live. You've explained everything beautifully and left everyone speechless, which is incredible.
No, I don't know about that, but thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So if nobody has any more comments, Megan, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. I'm just so, every time that we talk about the venture fund, it just kind of gets me all lit up and excited.
I'm glad. It's fun.
I've got a few thoughts I'm going to share with you in an email tomorrow, so look for a note from me on that. And this is so great. Thank you for everything you're doing with COVID. Thank you for being a big corporation that's actively involved with startups. As you mentioned, there's not a lot of them. And thank you for being willing to share your time with our audience tonight. And stay well, as we like to say, stay mighty. And I will talk with you soon. Our sponsors tonight have been Cook Medical and the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, and big thanks to them as well. This would not be possible without you all. And we'll be cranking up our next round of sessions right at 6 o'clock. So we hope to see you. Heather, would you sort of tee up what's next for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Our next session happening from 6 to 7 is called Celebrating the 155th Anniversary of Freedom. It's a session all about the African American cultural traditions around the Juneteenth festival, which we also have a virtual Juneteenth festival happening here in Winston-Salem coming up this weekend. So just go to our website, and let me link it in the chat really quick so you can just click in there. We'd love to have you join us.
And then, I'm sorry, our 7 o'clock session is Atkins High School, which is the Academy and Technology High School in town. We'll have 3 of the instructors and 2 recent graduates, class of 2020 students who have graduated from their biotechnology program. So we have the Juneteenth celebration at 6, and then at 7 o'clock, we will have Atkins High School.